The air was thick with the scent of barbecue and summer, the kind of afternoon that should have been nothing but peaceful. But then the quiet snapped. It started with a casual comment, something I thought was just a small win, a quiet milestone. What followed was a deafening silence, shattered glass, and a laugh from my grandfather that cut through everything, a sound I'll never forget. It was our annual summer get-together, the same backyard where Ethan and I had played as kids. As soon as the words about my third property left my mouth, I saw it. That familiar, ugly red creep up Ethan's neck. Then, the bottle was in the air, a blur against the bright afternoon sky. It whizzed past my ear, exploding against the weathered fence, beer foam weeping down the pickets. Mom, Denise, let out a sharp cry, her hands flying to her face. Dad, David, froze mid-chew, his burger suspended. The entire family fell into stunned silence. That's when my 82-year-old grandfather, Arthur, started to chuckle. A deep, knowing rumble that sliced through the shock. He slowly pushed himself up, his eyes fixed on Ethan, then spoke words that would unravel 28 years of family dynamics forever. Growing up in the Miller household, one rule was absolute. Ethan came first. Always. I learned this when I was 18. His Yale acceptance letter arrived the same day as my Ocean County College acceptance. The house erupted in celebration for Ethan. My envelope? It sat unopened on the kitchen counter for 3 days, a forgotten ghost. Denise called every relative within a 50-mile radius, announcing her precious son was off to America's most prestigious university. David uncorked a champagne bottle he'd been saving since their wedding, labeling it for a truly special occasion. Meanwhile, I quietly enrolled, pursuing an associate degree in business. No one asked about my plans. No congratulations. I was background noise to Ethan's symphony of achievements. The pattern continued. When Ethan turned 17, David surprised him with a brand new BMW 3 Series, leather interior, premium sound system. It gleamed in our driveway, a metallic silver trophy. Ethan acted like it was his birthright, telling friends it was just a starter car until college. I'd been working 2 part-time jobs since 16, saving every dime. 6 months later, I scraped together enough for a 10-year-old Honda Civic with 130,000 miles. No AC, only AM radio. But it was mine. I'd earned every single payment. When Ethan graduated from Yale with his business degree, David handed him the keys to a corner office at Miller Construction. His embossed business cards read, Ethan Miller, Vice President of Operations. He was 21, had never swung a hammer, never read a blueprint. David justified it, saying Ethan needed executive experience to eventually take over. The favoritism was so blatant, even some longtime employees began murmuring about fairness. During those same years, I was grinding through business school at night, working full-time by day. I'd transferred my community college credits to Rowan University, chipping away at my bachelor's in finance. My day started at 6 a.m. as an administrative assistant at a small accounting firm. Evenings were spent in lecture halls, devouring market analysis and investment strategies. I graduated with honors, no student debt, every credit hour paid for myself. While Ethan was being groomed for a construction empire, I was quietly building my own. I'd spent months studying real estate markets, analyzing trends across southern New Jersey. At 25, I bought my first rental, a modest 3-bedroom colonial in Cherry Hill. It needed cosmetic work, but had great bones. Weekends were for painting, fixture replacement, learning basic plumbing from YouTube. Within 6 months, I had reliable tenants, covering the mortgage with a comfortable $400 left over. 2 years later, I bought a second, a duplex in Cranberry, generating even better cash flow. Every profit was reinvested. I lived modestly in a small apartment, pouring everything into a portfolio that would eventually guarantee financial freedom. The irony wasn't lost on me. Ethan, with his Ivy League degree and VP title, was still living in my parents' guest bedroom at 28. He drove his BMW to work, wore expensive suits Denise bought, and spent evenings gaming or at pricey restaurants, all on Dad's credit card. Which brings us back to last Sunday's family barbecue. Our annual summer farewell. Grandfather Arthur was holding court near the grill, spinning tales from his 40 years as a general contractor before David took over. I was chatting with my cousin, Olivia, about career shifts. She mentioned wanting to try real estate investing. Actually, I said, keeping my voice low and casual, I just closed on my third property last week. It's a small apartment building in Kingston for units. The numbers look really promising. The words were barely out before I saw Ethan stop mid-sentence, his face turning that angry, familiar red. The kind of flush from childhood tantrums when he didn't get his way instantly. He stomped over, his beer bottle gripped so tightly his knuckles were white. Third property, he snarled, loud enough for conversations nearby to die down. Are you seriously lying to people about being some kind of real estate mogul? You work as a secretary and live in that pathetic studio apartment downtown. The accusations stung. Not because they were true, but because they exposed how little my own brother knew about my life. He'd been so wrapped up in his own privilege, he'd never bothered to ask what I actually did. I'd been promoted to senior financial analyst 2 years ago. I'd moved from that studio apartment 18 months prior. Ethan, I'm not lying, I replied, trying to stay calm. I've been investing since I was 25. It started small, but *T, he exploded, hurling the bottle with full force. I ducked, hearing the rush of air as it flew past, shattering against the fence. Beer and glass sprayed the patio. Our golden retriever, Max, bolted for the house. The entire yard went silent, save for Denise's immediate, ragged sobs. She covered her face, rocking in her chair like she was watching a catastrophe unfold. David was still frozen, burger midair, mouth agape. Uncle Paul stepped closer to shield his wife, Susan, and their kids. That's when Grandfather Arthur's laughter cut through. It began as a low chuckle, then swelled into a full-bodied, genuine laugh. He rose slowly, his weathered hands gripping the armrests, fixing Ethan with a stare that could melt steel. "Boy," he said, his voice carrying the authority of 8 decades. "You just threw a tantrum about your sister's success, while you've been stealing from the family business for 3 years." The words landed like a physical blow. Ethan went ashen. David dropped his burger. Denise's crying stopped so abruptly, it was like a switch flipped. Grandfather Arthur reached into his shirt pocket, pulling out a thick, folded envelope. "I've been the silent partner in Miller Construction for 40 years. And I've been watching the books very carefully lately. Ethan, you've been taking company funds. $87,000 in forged invoices, padded expense reports, skimmed cash from off-the-books jobs. I have bank statements, canceled checks, documentation of every fraudulent transaction." The accusation detonated in our suburban backyard. My casual mention of a real estate investment had just exposed a crime that would shatter my family's foundation forever. The silence that followed Arthur's revelation stretched for an eternity, though it was probably only 15 seconds. Uncle Paul broke it, quietly ushering Susan and their 2 daughters toward the house, murmuring something about more ice. Other family members started finding excuses to step away from the blast zone. No one actually left, but this was the kind of family drama people would dissect for years. Ethan stood frozen, his face a kaleidoscope of shock, denial, rage, then fear, before cycling back to shock. His mouth opened and closed several times. "That's absolutely ridiculous," he finally stammered, his voice cracking. "I would never take from Dad's company. This is insane. Grandpa, you're 82. Maybe you're confused about some paperwork or confused?" Arthur's voice held a sharp edge I'd never heard. He opened the envelope, spreading documents across the picnic table, weighing them down with salt and pepper shakers. "These bank statements show cash deposits to your personal account that don't match any legitimate payroll. This invoice is for lumber delivered to a site we finished 6 months before the date on the paperwork. And this expense report claims you bought $8,000 worth of power tools that never appeared in our inventory." David finally found his voice, stepping closer to examine the papers. His face grew paler with each document. "Ethan, what is this? These invoices have my signature, but I don't remember authorizing these purchases. Because you didn't authorize them, Arthur said grimly. He's been using the signature stamp from your office desk. I noticed discrepancies in the quarterly reports about 6 months ago and started my own investigation. Denise had stopped crying, but looked like she might collapse, gripping her chair arms so tightly I worried she'd tip over. There has to be an explanation, she whispered. Ethan wouldn't steal from family. He's going through a difficult time with work stress, but he wouldn't. What work stress? I found myself asking before I could stop the words. He shows up at the office at 10, takes 2-hour lunches, and leaves by 4. Half the time he's playing games on his computer instead of reviewing contracts. Ethan whirled, his eyes blazing. How would you know anything about my schedule? You don't work in construction. You don't understand the pressure of running major projects. I drive past the office every morning at 8:30 on my way to work, I replied. Your BMW is never in the lot before 10. And Olivia's husband, Daniel, works as an electrician on several of your projects. He's mentioned you rarely show up at job sites, and when you do, it's mostly personal calls. The additional details seemed to deflate Ethan's indignation. David looked at him with an expression I'd never seen, disappointment mixed with genuine confusion, like he was seeing his son clearly for the first time. Ethan, David said quietly, I need you to look me in the eye and tell me the truth. Did you take money from our company? Instead of answering, Ethan launched into a desperate deflection. This is all coming from her, he said, pointing a shaking finger at me. She's been jealous of my success since we were kids. She probably manipulated Grandpa into believing these lies so she could destroy my reputation and take my place in the company. The accusation was so absurd, I actually laughed out loud. Take your place? Ethan, I have a career in financial analysis. I've never expressed interest in construction management. And I definitely didn't manipulate an 82-year-old man into fabricating bank records and forged invoices. Arthur stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of someone who built a business from nothing and ran it successfully for 4 decades. Nobody manipulated me. I've been tracking these irregularities for months, using the same forensic accounting methods I learned when the IRS audited us back in 1995. Every piece of evidence is documented, cross-referenced, and verified. David sat heavily at the picnic table, examining the paperwork more thoroughly. The dropped burger, now attracting flies, went unnoticed. After several minutes, he looked up at Ethan, tears in his eyes. These signatures look exactly like mine, but I remember specifically choosing not to approve this lumber order because we had excess inventory. And this tool purchase. Ethan, I asked you to research new equipment suppliers, but I told you not to place any orders without running the final costs past me first. The foundation of Ethan's defense crumbled, but instead of admitting guilt, he doubled down on his anger.
Fine.
Maybe I made some executive decisions without approval. Maybe I streamlined some purchasing processes to improve efficiency, but calling it stealing is completely unfair. I was trying to help the business grow. Help the business grow by depositing company checks into your personal bank account. Arthur's question hung in the air. Ethan stormed toward the house, then spun around for a final outburst. This family has never appreciated anything I've contributed. I graduated from Yale. I brought sophisticated business practices to a small-town construction company. I've been working to modernize operations and improve profitability. And this is the thanks I get? You're all going to regret treating me like a criminal. He disappeared inside, leaving us staring at each other across a backyard littered with broken glass and shattered assumptions. Denise was crying again, quietly this time, like someone grieving. David looked 5 years older. The remaining family members slowly drifted back, drawn by curiosity, sensing the crisis had plateaued. Aunt Susan rubbed Denise's shoulders. Uncle Paul began cleaning up the broken bottle with a small hand broom. I felt oddly detached, watching someone else's family fall apart. My real estate investment, which sparked this whole confrontation, now seemed trivial compared to the magnitude of what had been revealed. My brother had been systematically taking from our father's business, living a lifestyle funded by deceit and family generosity. 3 days passed before Ethan emerged from his self-imposed isolation. During that time, David spent hours at the office, reviewing financial records with Arthur and their longtime accountant, Brenda Miller. The full scope of the financial impropriety became clearer with each session. Ethan had been remarkably systematic in his approach. On Wednesday evening, Ethan called a family meeting. He asked everyone to gather at my parents' house at 7, claiming he had important information to clarify Sunday's misunderstandings. His tone on the phone was confident, almost arrogant, strange given the evidence against him. I arrived to find Ethan at the dining room table, a black leather briefcase before him like a shield. He wore an expensive suit, hair perfectly styled, as if for a business presentation, not to address criminal accusations. "I appreciate everyone taking time from their schedules," he began, his voice carrying the polished tone he used with clients. "I've spent the past 3 days conducting my own investigation into the financial irregularities grandfather Arthur discovered, and I'm afraid the situation is more complicated than any of us initially realized." He opened the briefcase with theatrical precision, removing documents in clear plastic sleeves. The presentation felt rehearsed. After reviewing company records and cross-referencing expense reports with project timelines, I've discovered that the impropriety Arthur identified is real. However, he identified the wrong perpetrator. Ethan paused dramatically. "The person who has been taking from Miller Construction is Audra." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. My breathing became shallow. My vision narrowed as Ethan began spreading documents meant to prove my guilt. Official company letterhead, what appeared to be Dad's signature, detailed expense reports with my name highlighted. These invoices show payments to Audra's landscaping company for work at various construction sites over the past 2 years. The problem is, she never registered a landscaping company, never performed any work for us, and the bank account receiving these payments belongs to her personally. He was lying. Every word a carefully constructed falsehood to shift blame. But the documents looked convincing. I saw doubt creeping into my parents' expressions. Ethan had spent 3 days not reflecting on his misdeeds, but creating an elaborate frame-up to destroy my reputation, potentially sending me to prison for his theft. The aftermath felt like a nightmare, reality shifting beneath my feet. I stared at the forged documents, fake email exchanges, bank statements showing payments from Miller Construction to my fictitious landscaping business. Most damaging, meticulously detailed expense reports with photos of completed landscaping at sites I'd never visited. "This is impossible," I said, my voice sounding distant. "I've never owned a landscaping company. These documents are fake." Ethan leaned back, satisfied. "I understand this is difficult to accept, but the evidence is overwhelming. I think you started small, maybe just padding a few reports, then it escalated when you realized how easy it was to manipulate Dad's trust." David picked up a fake invoice, studying it with the same attention he gave blueprints. The letterhead looked authentic, descriptions detailed and professional. "Audra," David said slowly, "can you explain why your name appears on these invoices and why money was transferred to an account linked to your social security number?" His question revealed Ethan's meticulous preparation. He hadn't just faked paperwork. He'd accessed my personal information to make the financial trail appear authentic. Panic rose. How could I disprove such detailed, sophisticated accusations? "I need to hire an attorney," I said, surprisingly steady, "and a forensic accountant to examine every one of these documents. If Ethan claims I took from the company, we need a professional investigation to determine the truth." Denise looked between us, her face reflecting a mother's agony. "Why would either of you take from family? How did we get to this point?" The next morning, I called in sick, spending the day researching forensic accounting firms in New Jersey. I needed experience with financial fraud, embezzlement investigations. After 3 hours, I found Sarah Jenkins at Integrity Financial Services. CPA, Masters in Forensic Accounting, 15 years with prosecution and defense attorneys. Sarah agreed to meet that afternoon. Her office was modern in Morristown. She exuded quiet confidence. She listened carefully, taking notes, asking clarifying questions. "Your brother's documentation looks professional at first glance," she said, after reviewing the papers Ethan presented. "But there are several red flags suggesting forgery. The font in these invoices doesn't match standard formatting from 2 years ago. Also, the metadata on these digital documents will tell us exactly when they were created and what software was used. While Sarah began her technical analysis, I reached out to grandfather Arthur for support. He remained convinced of my innocence. We met for coffee. He brought additional evidence. "I've been building this case for months," Arthur explained, spreading bank statements and canceled checks. "Ethan got sloppy about 6 months ago. Larger withdrawals, forged signatures on checks needing dual authorization. I think his gambling habit escalated, and he needed more money faster." This was the first mention of gambling. Arthur explained he'd been quietly investigating Ethan's finances. Regular trips to a casino town in Pennsylvania, large cash advances, suspicious transactions, suggesting a serious addiction. "How long have you known about the gambling?" I asked. "I started suspecting something last Christmas when he asked for a personal loan of $15,000. Claimed it was for investments, but he was evasive, desperate. I didn't give him the money, but I started paying closer attention." Arthur's investigation revealed escalating financial desperation. Ethan had maxed out 3 credit cards, taken cash advances against his BMW loan, even borrowed from Yale classmates. The pressure to maintain his lifestyle, feeding his addiction, had apparently driven him to this. 2 days later, Sarah called with preliminary results. The news was worse than I expected. "Your brother's frame-up was extraordinarily sophisticated," she reported. "He used professional-grade software. He's been planning this deception for approximately 5 months. The metadata shows he's been systematically creating false financial records and email trails, building toward this moment when he'd need a scapegoat." Sarah discovered Ethan had accessed my personal information through family documents at my parents' house. He'd used my social security number for a fictitious business, monitored my actual accounts to make his false trail convincing. Most disturbing, she found evidence he'd been in contact with a private investigator, Kevin O'Connell, seemingly planning my arrest. The phone records show multiple conversations with him, a PI specializing in building criminal cases for corporate clients, Sarah explained. "Based on the timing, it appears your brother was planning to present evidence to law enforcement and press formal charges against you." The revelation hit me hard. Ethan hadn't just been taking money. He planned to have me arrested, potentially imprisoned, for his crimes. He was willing to destroy my career, my reputation, my freedom to protect himself. Sarah's investigation also revealed the true scope of Ethan's financial impropriety. The $87,000 Arthur initially found was only part of it. Ethan had been taking for nearly 4 years, not 3. The actual amount approached $130,000. He got more sophisticated over time, Sarah explained. Early thefts were simple, inflated expense reports. But as his gambling debts increased, he started creating entirely fictitious vendors and forging complex approval chains. Armed with Sarah's professional analysis and Arthur's evidence, I called another family meeting. This time, I was prepared. But I dreaded the moment my parents would have to confront the reality that their golden child had been willing to destroy his own sister. The meeting was scheduled for Saturday afternoon, giving Sarah time to prepare a comprehensive report and me time to mentally prepare for the most difficult conversation of my life. I knew this evidence would likely tear my family apart, but allowing Ethan's lies to stand would be far more destructive. As I prepared, I thought about all the warning signs we'd ignored. Ethan's entitlement, his lack of remorse for smaller deceptions, his willingness to manipulate. All excused because he was the golden child who could do no wrong. Now, the family would learn their golden child was a criminal, willing to frame his own sister. The revelation would force everyone to reevaluate decades of family dynamics, facing the uncomfortable truth that their favoritism had helped create a monster. Saturday afternoon arrived, crisp and beautiful, the kind of October weather usually perfect for a family gathering. Instead, I sat in my car outside my parents' house, Sarah Jenkins' report in hand, trying to summon courage. The weight felt crushing, not just Ethan's crimes, but his systematic plan to destroy me. I'd asked Sarah to accompany me for credibility. She sat beside me, reviewing notes, occasionally glancing with compassionate concern, the kind that suggested she'd seen families torn apart by financial crimes before. "Are you ready for this?" she asked gently. "Once we present this evidence, there's no taking it back. Your family is going to confront some very difficult truths." I nodded, though I knew I'd never be truly ready. We gathered our materials, walking up the familiar brick walkway to the house where I'd grown up, where countless celebrations had taken place. David answered, looking considerably older, his confident demeanor replaced by an uncertain posture. Denise appeared behind him, eyes red, clutching a tissue. Ethan was already at the dining table, briefcase prominently displayed, forged documents in neat stacks. His confidence seemed unshaken. Grandfather Arthur arrived shortly after, carrying a cardboard box filled with additional financial records. At 82, he moved slowly but with determination. "Before we begin," I said, striving for a calm, professional tone, "I've hired Sarah Jenkins, a certified forensic accountant, to conduct an independent investigation into the financial irregularities at Miller Construction. Her findings will speak for themselves." Ethan leaned forward, a condescending smile. "I think we've already established the facts pretty clearly. Hiring an expensive consultant to muddy the waters seems like an unnecessary complication." Sarah opened her laptop, connecting it to a portable projector. The first slide displayed her credentials. Immediate, authoritative impact. "I've analyzed every document presented by both parties," Sarah began. "And I can definitively state that the invoices and financial records Ethan presented as evidence against Audra are sophisticated forgeries." She clicked to a side-by-side comparison of legitimate invoices versus Ethan's fakes. Subtle but clear differences. Incorrect fonts, inconsistent formatting, digital signatures that didn't match. "The metadata analysis is even more revealing," Sarah continued, advancing to technical data. "These documents, purporting to be from 2 years ago, were actually created last Tuesday and Wednesday, using current software not available during the time period they supposedly represent." Ethan's confident expression began to crumble. Sarah systematically demolished his deception, email headers proving fabricated correspondence, bank records showing the account receiving payments belonged to a shell company Ethan created using stolen personal information, phone logs demonstrating his contact with the private investigator, Kevin O'Connell. "Most concerning," Sarah said, clicking to a slide of phone records, "is evidence that Ethan has been planning this frame-up for approximately 5 months. He has been systematically building false documentation while simultaneously escalating his financial impropriety from Miller Construction." David stared at the screen, then turned to Ethan. "You are planning to have your sister arrested for crimes you committed?" For the first time, Ethan seemed genuinely speechless. His mouth opened and closed. The foundation of his deception was collapsing so completely, he couldn't rationalize or deflect. Denise stood abruptly, her chair scraping. "This is not happening," she cried, her voice rising to hysteria. "My children are not criminals. This is all some horrible misunderstanding." Grandfather Arthur opened his cardboard box, removing more evidence. Bank statements, canceled checks, photographs of Ethan at a casino town in Pennsylvania, taken by the private investigator Arthur had hired. "The misunderstanding," Arthur said firmly, "is that we've been enabling Ethan's destructive behavior for years instead of holding him accountable. The boy owes $73,000 to underground poker games, and he's been taking from the family business to pay gambling debts." The gambling debts added another layer of complexity. Ethan finally found his voice, but not with remorse. "You've all been against me from the beginning," he shouted, voice shaking. "Audra has been the favorite daughter who could do no wrong, while I've been expected to be perfect. You praise her for buying properties with money that probably came from taking from our company. But when I try to make executive decisions to improve business operations, I get accused of being a criminal." The accusation was so far from reality, I felt disoriented. Ethan genuinely seemed to believe he was unfairly treated. "Ethan," David said, his voice cracking, "you are given every advantage. Yale education, a BMW, a management position, unlimited financial support. How can you possibly claim you were treated unfairly?" Instead of answering, Ethan stood, his chair falling. He paced like a caged animal. Fine, he exploded. Maybe I took some money. Maybe I made some financial decisions without proper authorization. But I was desperate. And this family never cared enough to notice I was struggling. The partial confession hung in the air, followed by something more shocking. You want to know why I've been struggling? Ethan's voice cracked. Why I felt like an outsider my entire life. It's because I know I'm not really part of this family. The words hit the room like a bomb. Everyone stared, confused, then with growing dread. I found my adoption papers when I was 16, he continued, tears streaming down his face. Hidden in Mom's jewelry box when I was looking for my birth certificate for my driver's license. I've spent 12 years knowing I was adopted, knowing I wasn't really a Miller. Watching Audra succeed on her own merit, while I was being handed everything out of your guilt for not telling me the truth. The revelation explained so much. Ethan's entitlement, his resentment, his desperate need for validation. But it also made his crimes feel more tragic. Denise collapsed into her chair, sobbing. David looked physically struck, his face pale, hands trembling. Sweetheart, Denise managed through tears. Adoption doesn't make you any less our son. You were 6 months old when we brought you home. We've loved you as our child for 28 years. But I'm not your real child, Ethan replied bitterly. Audra is your biological daughter. She's the one who inherited your work ethic. I'm just some stranger's baby you took in and tried to turn into something I was never meant to be. The pain in his voice was genuine, heartbreaking, but it didn't excuse his actions. Watching my brother crumble, I realized his criminal behavior stemmed from years of resentment and self-doubt none of us recognized. The confrontation revealed far more than financial crimes. It exposed decades of family dysfunction, hidden pain, and fundamental misunderstandings about love, belonging, and family. The silence after Ethan's adoption revelation was almost unbearable. No one knew how to respond. I stared at him, really seeing him for the first time in years, processing that his entire criminal enterprise was fueled by a secret he'd carried alone since 16. Denise broke it, her voice thick with tears. Ethan, honey, we should have told you. We were planning to, but you were so young. And then, as you got older, it just became harder. David nodded. We were afraid you might feel different. We thought we were protecting you, but we were wrong. Ethan sank into his chair, anger draining. I spent 12 years feeling like a fraud. Every family photo, every celebration, every achievement, I felt like I was pretending to belong somewhere I didn't fit. The conversation that followed was unprecedented. Years of unspoken assumptions spilled out. But Sarah Jenkins' presence reminded us, beneath the emotional complexity, serious crimes were committed that family therapy alone couldn't fix. I understand this is incredibly difficult, Sarah interjected gently. But we still need to address the financial fraud. Ethan has admitted to taking company funds. There's evidence of systematic financial impropriety totaling over $130,000. Grandfather Arthur opened his box of evidence, pulling out a manila folder he hadn't shown anyone. There's something else everyone needs to know, he said grimly. Ethan's adoption wasn't the secret you thought it was. He opened the folder. Old hospital records, birth certificates, legal papers, yellowed with age. Your parents found out Ethan knew about his adoption 7 years ago, Arthur continued. Denise discovered the paperwork in her jewelry box had been disturbed. They hired a private investigator to monitor Ethan. He confirmed their son had discovered the truth. This hit like a second explosion. David and Denise exchanged shocked glances. You've known for 7 years that I knew? Ethan's voice was a whisper. You've been watching me struggle with this secret, pretending you didn't know. Denise buried her face in her hands, sobbing anew. We didn't know how to bring it up. Every time we tried, it felt too big. And then you seemed to be doing well, so we convinced ourselves you'd processed it. David's voice was hollow. The truth is, we started giving you more privileges after we realized you knew. The BMW, the executive position, the financial support, we were trying to prove you were loved, even if not biologically related. The pattern was clear. Ethan's entitlement hadn't developed in a vacuum. It was systematically reinforced by parents overcompensating for guilt and fear of losing their adopted son. "You created a monster," Grandfather Arthur said bluntly. "Instead of an honest conversation about adoption, you enabled increasingly poor behavior because you felt guilty about circumstances that were never shameful." I felt a strange sympathy for Ethan despite everything. His actions were inexcusable, but I understood the emotional foundation. He'd spent 12 years believing he was an outsider, receiving charity, when in reality, he was genuinely loved by parents too afraid of difficult conversations to provide emotional honesty. "This doesn't excuse the financial impropriety," I said carefully, balancing empathy and accountability. "Ethan, you took over $100,000 from Dad's business. You forged documents, created fake entities, and tried to frame me for a serious offense. Those are serious crimes, regardless of emotional pain." Ethan looked directly at me for the first time since his breakdown. "I know what I did was wrong. I started small, just a few hundred here and there to cover gambling losses. But once it started, it felt impossible to stop. Every time I told myself it would be the last time, but the debts kept growing, and I got in deeper with people who don't accept excuses." The admission was the closest thing to genuine remorse. But Arthur's expression remained stern. "The gambling explains the motivation, but it doesn't explain why you spent months planning to frame your sister. That level of deception requires calculated malice, not just desperation." Ethan was quiet. I was terrified of going to prison. I convinced myself Audra could prove her innocence, and she had enough money from her investments for good lawyers. I thought maybe she'd get probation or community service, while I'd get years because of the amount I'd taken. The explanation revealed a breathtaking selfishness. He was willing to destroy my life because he believed I was better equipped to survive his consequences. Sarah Jenkins, who had listened with professional detachment, finally interjected. "Regardless of family dynamics, we need to discuss next steps. Ethan has confessed to serious financial impropriety and attempted deception. This case will need to be reported to law enforcement, and there will likely be criminal charges." The reminder of legal reality brought everyone back. Ethan faced serious prison time. The company's reputation could be permanently damaged. Financial losses might not be fully recovered. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. Denise looked at David, asking permission. He nodded reluctantly. She opened her purse, pulling out a small digital recorder. "There's something else you need to know," she said, her voice shaking, placing the device on the table. "We've known about Ethan's gambling addiction for 2 years. We've known about the debt to underground poker games, and we've known about the escalating financial impropriety from the company." She pressed play. Ethan's voice filled the room, from a phone conversation with someone clearly a loan shark. Ethan pleaded for more time, promising access to company funds, describing his plan to take care of the auditor problem by shifting blame to someone else. The recording was devastating evidence that Ethan's actions were premeditated, and that my parents knew, allowing it to continue. They knew he planned to frame me, and they'd done nothing to warn or protect me. Ethan's voice on the recording, confessing, describing his plan to frame me, created a silence so complete I could hear the grandfather clock. The weight of betrayal was crushing, not just from Ethan but from parents who knew his plan and chose to protect him. "You recorded me without my knowledge?" Ethan's voice was barely audible. "You've been spying on your own son?" Denise's hands shook as she turned off the recorder. "We hired the private investigator Arthur recommended after the gambling debts reached $50,000. We thought if we understood the scope, we could find a way to help you without involving law enforcement." David's voice was hollow. "We were trying to gather evidence to negotiate with your creditors. We thought maybe we could pay off the debts and get you into treatment for the gambling addiction." The revelation that my parents had been conducting surveillance while enabling his actions added another layer of dysfunction. But what hurt most was their silence, knowing he planned to frame me. "How long did you know he was planning to blame me?" I asked, my voice distant. Denise couldn't meet my eyes. 3 weeks. The recording is from 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks. I repeated, trying to process it. "You knew for 3 weeks that Ethan planned to have me arrested, and you didn't say anything?" David finally looked at me, his face showing shame and regret. We thought we could convince him to confess, without anyone getting hurt. We were planning an intervention after the barbecue. The timing was almost laughably ironic. Their carefully orchestrated plan derailed by a casual conversation. Grandfather Arthur's expression was disgusted disappointment. You enabled serious misconduct for months while allowing an innocent family member to be set up as a scapegoat. That's not protection. That's collaboration. Ethan stood abruptly, his chair falling. He paced frantically. The recording had shattered his last hope of a victim narrative. None of this matters now, he said, his voice manic. Everyone knows the truth. My life is over. I'm going to prison. I'll never work in construction again. I'll be known as the family criminal who tried to frame his own sister. He walked to the window, staring out at the backyard where it began. When he turned, his face held a calm resignation, more frightening than panic. I can't live with this, he said quietly. I can't face prison, and I can't face the shame. Maybe it would be better if I just disappeared. The words sent a chill. Denise immediately moved to him. Don't say things like that, she said, reaching for his arm. We'll get through this. We'll find the money for restitution. We'll get you help for the gambling, and we'll face whatever legal consequences come, together. Ethan shrugged away, going to the kitchen, returning with a prescription pill bottle. I've been thinking about this for days, he said, eerily calm. These are sleeping pills Dr. Evans prescribed for anxiety. I've been saving them. The threat was clear. Denise burst into fresh tears. David fumbled for his cell phone. Ethan opened the bottle, pouring 20 or 30 pills into his palm. Ethan, don't do this. David pleaded, finger hovering over the emergency button. Whatever problems, we can solve them together. This isn't the answer. As Ethan raised his hand, I noticed something. The pills were white and round, but the size and shape looked familiar. I'd been taking vitamin C supplements. They looked identical. Stop, I said, walking closer. Those aren't sleeping pills. Ethan froze, hand halfway, his eyes meeting mine, surprise and panic growing. Those are vitamin C tablets, I continued, recognizing the specific brand I bought in bulk. I can see the faint imprint on the side that says, Nature's Bounty 1000 milligrams. The entire room deflated. Ethan's threat to self-harm was as fake as his documents. Even his final desperate gambit was built on deception. Sarah Jenkins, who had observed with professional detachment, finally spoke with clinical assessment. This is a classic manipulation tactic used by individuals with certain personality traits. When all other attempts to control the narrative fail, they resort to threats of self-harm to regain sympathy and avoid accountability. The psychological evaluation, delivered with Sarah's calm professionalism, stripped away Ethan's last shred of a victim narrative. David slowly lowered his phone. Denise stopped crying, staring at Ethan with an expression I'd never seen, disappointment mixed with recognition that her son wasn't who she believed. Even your self-harm threat is fake. Denise's voice held incredulous betrayal. How long have you been manipulating this family with lies? Ethan let the tablets fall, scattering across the floor like confetti. His shoulders sagged. His final attempt to manipulate had backfired completely. I wasn't really going to harm myself, he admitted quietly. I just wanted everyone to stop being so angry and remember that I'm still part of this family despite what I've done. The admission was the final straw for Grandfather Arthur. He stood, fixing Ethan with a stare carrying 8 decades of wisdom and disappointment. Boy, you've lied about everything else, and now you're lying about wanting to harm yourself. You've taken from your father, framed your sister for serious offenses, and manipulated your parents' love into enabling criminal behavior. You're not the victim in this story. You're the perpetrator. Arthur gathered his files, heading to the door, pausing only for a final judgment. Real family members don't destroy each other to save themselves. What you've done proves you never understood what it meant to be a Miller, adoption or no adoption. As the door closed, I realized the confrontation had ended. Ethan's web of lies was exposed. No more opportunities to shift blame. The fake self-harm gambit was his last desperate attempt, but it only revealed his willingness to deceive the people who loved him most. The aftermath of Ethan's fake self-harm attempt marked the beginning of our family's most difficult period, but also the foundation for genuine healing. The following Monday, David called the police, armed with Sarah's and Arthur's evidence. Ethan was arrested at the construction office, trying to delete computer files. The legal process moved swiftly. His sophisticated forgeries and frame-up elevated charges to aggravated fraud with intent to obstruct justice. The district attorney was particularly interested in his systematic plan to destroy me. Ethan's attorney negotiated a plea agreement: 18 months in minimum security prison, 3 years supervised probation, full restitution of $137,000. The gambling debts required David to take a second mortgage to protect Ethan from potential violence. During the 6 months between arrest and sentencing, our family entered intensive therapy with Dr. Emily Hayes, addressing decades of dysfunction. The sessions were painful but necessary, forcing us to confront uncomfortable truths about favoritism, enabling behavior, and the difference between love and guilt. Denise struggled most, her maternal instincts so focused on protection that she never allowed Ethan to develop accountability. David had similar issues, recognizing how guilt about the adoption secret led him to create an environment where Ethan felt entitled. I worked through anger, betrayal, and unexpected grief for the brother I thought I knew. Therapy helped me understand Ethan's adoption status never mattered to me. He was my annoying little brother, but he was always family. His perception of being an outsider was self-created, based on secrets and assumptions. The most surprising development was Ethan's gradual transformation in prison. The structured environment and mandatory counseling for gambling addiction forced him to confront his behavior. He wrote letters to me and our parents, acknowledging his crimes, accepting responsibility without excuses. His first letter to me arrived 4 months into his sentence. "Audra, I know apologizing doesn't undo the damage. I spent months planning to have you arrested for crimes I committed, and there's no explanation that makes that acceptable. I was willing to destroy your life to save myself from consequences I deserved. That's not something a real brother would ever do, and I understand if you never want to speak to me again." The 3-page letter detailed his recognition of manipulation tactics, his commitment to genuine change. It was the first honest communication from him. While Ethan served his sentence, I continued building my real estate portfolio with renewed focus. The stress had motivated me. By his release, I owned 7 rental properties and started consulting for women entering real estate. David restructured Miller Construction with new oversight, bringing Arthur in as an official partner. The company's reputation recovered as clients learned the family reported the financial impropriety and made full restitution. Ethan's release was handled carefully, with clear boundaries. He moved into a halfway house, finding work as a construction laborer. The manual labor was humbling but therapeutic. The first time I saw him after release was at a family dinner 6 months later. He was different. Thinner, careful, humble. The arrogant entitlement was replaced by genuine remorse and self-awareness. "I know this doesn't fix anything," he said privately, "but I think about what I did to you every day. You worked hard to build something real while I was taking and lying. You deserved a brother who supported your success instead of one who tried to destroy it out of jealousy." The conversation was awkward but necessary, marking the beginning of a gradual rebuilding of our relationship. I didn't forgive him immediately. Trust had to be earned. 2 years later, Ethan maintained sobriety, paid 60% of his restitution, and developed a relationship with Jessica Lee, a social worker who knew his history. Their relationship was built on honesty. The most meaningful healing came at grandfather Arthur's 85th birthday. Ethan approached me, asking to speak to the family. In the same backyard where the crisis began 3 years earlier, he delivered a speech unlike anything I'd heard. "I want to thank Audra for refusing to enable my destructive behavior, even when it would have been easier to let me get away with manipulating everyone's sympathy," he said, his voice steady. "I spent years believing I was the victim when I'd been given every advantage and wasted them. Audra succeeded through her own hard work while I was taking from family and planning to frame her. She had every right to hate me, but instead she's given me the opportunity to earn back her trust. The speech included apologies to our parents, recognition of pain caused, and commitment to growth. It was the first time he took complete responsibility. I realized the golden child was gone. In his place was someone who learned the value of honesty, accountability, and genuine relationships. The family that emerged was healthier. We learned to love without guilt, to have difficult conversations, to hold each other accountable. My business thrived. Ethan found fulfillment in work earned through skill. Our parents learned to show love through honesty. True family bonds aren't created by blood or material generosity. They're built on honesty, accountability, and love strong enough to demand the best. Ethan's adoption never made him less of a Miller. His criminal behavior made him unworthy. But his commitment to change earned him the right to be called our brother again. 3 years after that barbecue, we gathered again in the same backyard for Arthur's birthday. No secrets, no resentments, no special treatment. We were finally a real family, built on truth, held together by love strong enough to demand the best. The golden child, who valued nothing, was gone. In his place, a man who learned the most precious things: trust, respect, genuine family bonds, are earned through honest effort. That transformation took criminal charges, prison, years of hard work. But it saved not just Ethan, but our entire family. As I watched him help Arthur blow out his candles, I reflected on our growth. Sometimes the most painful experiences become the foundation for the most meaningful growth. And the family member who almost destroyed us ultimately became the catalyst for making us stronger than we'd ever been. Have you ever had to choose between protecting a family member from consequences and holding them accountable for their actions?